Okay, I think pretty sure. Okay, it's now recording. Okay, so this morning, so welcome everyone. This is really my first attempt of doing a Zoom virtual meeting. Hi, Michelle. In this kind of a fashion, but I know it's hard to get away from the offices and to get out of the buildings. So just to kind of do a little refresher, hey Matt, I thought this would be kind of helpful just to kind of go through some of the information. And if you do have any questions that you want to put in the chat, feel free, or if you want to ask out loud, you can do so as well. I am going to share my screen, so I'm going to do that now. And when I share my screen, then I will just take you through just really a PowerPoint that was created like 2 years ago when we did a refresher, actually a year ago when we did a refresher. And nothing really has changed in regards to educator effectiveness. The only new component that just came in would be the 3-year rolling average for the PVAS data. But in terms of anything new, there really isn't anything unless, once the changes with the SPP come down the pike, which it's slated to do at some point, but nothing as at least to date is changing with the SPP as of now. But look for that to change at some point in the future as they look towards a more holistic approach to a school performance profile. So I'm going to just bring this PowerPoint up on my screen. If anyone has any trouble seeing anything, just let me know. All right, so we're going to go over Act 82 just briefly in terms of this. Like this isn't new. We know that this has been in effect for a couple years, 4 years actually at this point, which is kind of hard to believe. But Act 82 defined 3 groups of educators, and those 3 groups that fall under Act 82 are teaching professionals, non-teaching professionals, and principals and CTC directors. And I'll kind of go through each group and how the act is related to each one. This slide just shows how it kind of was rolled in layers. Act 82 applied to teaching professionals first in 2013-14, and then the following year applied to non-teaching professionals and principal CTC directors. So some of the especially early on, trying to figure out which bucket an educator or a professional would go into. Because like I said, there's a teaching professional bucket, non-teaching professionals, and principal CTCs. And you have all these different roles that people serve within a district. And which bucket do they filter into is a question. So if you look at folks that hold instructional certificates, okay, will either go into one of 2 buckets, either the teaching professional or non-teaching professional. I'll go into that in a little bit more. Supervisors of special ed, supervisors of curriculum. Supervisors fall in the non-teaching professional bucket. Educational specialists such as guidance counselors, school nurses, they fall in the non-teaching professional bucket. Principals, obviously, and CTC directors fall in this bucket. Vocational ed could go in either one of those buckets. So how do you determine those buckets? So you have to look at, job descriptions that you currently have on file. It's very important, and I know PDE has said in the past it's important to have job descriptions because those job descriptions help you filter the professionals into the right category. So there's this 2-pronged test. So it's 2 questions that you ask yourself to determine which bucket specifically teachers would fall into. So you first ask the question, is this professional working under an instructional certificate? Okay. And then the second question, which is probably the biggest one, is this teacher providing direct instruction to students? And what does direct instruction mean? It's this PTA. Does the teacher provide, is the teacher planning for, is the teacher delivering instruction, so teaching, and is the professional or the teacher assessing that instruction? So it's plan, teach, assess, okay? So those 2 questions help to determine whether a teacher is a teaching professional or a non-teaching professional. So for example, if you have an inclusion teacher who is, you know, pushing into the classroom, providing support, but isn't necessarily, they're not co-teaching, they're not helping to plan, they're not delivering any of the instruction, and they're not assessing any of that instruction, then that teacher most likely would be considered a non-teaching professional. But if there's ever a situation where a teacher says, yes, I'm providing direct instruction because I'm planning for, I'm teaching and assessing, then that teacher would be classified as a teaching professional. It can kind of get a little bit tricky. So like I said, if you have any questions, or if you have any situations of folks back in your district that you're unsure of, you can always email me or call me, and we can talk through, you know, if there's really certain special cases. So what you're seeing now is, like I said, it's not new. This has been around. This is really the pie chart that defines the whole Act 82, especially 82-1s for classroom teaching professionals. So we know that half of the teacher's evaluation is based upon observation and evidence, which is gathered through the Charlotte-Danielson domains. So 50% is applied, of that evidence is applied to a teacher's evaluation. Then the right side of the pie is where all the data comes in. We have building level data, which is derived from the SPP, the School Performance Profile. That's 15%. We have teacher specific data, and I'm going to get into details with this here in a little bit, because this is really the section that causes administrators probably the most stress, or you know, just trying to figure out. It takes time. It's really analyzing all of that data. And then 20% of a teacher's evaluation would be derived from that SLO, which is the elective data. Okay. Just so you're aware of, there are several different models of the Danielson framework. There's a 2008 version, an 11 version, and a 13 version. It doesn't matter which model your district is using. It really is it's a local choice there. But if the district wants to use anything else other than that, or what you see here, they have to submit a special request to PDE for approval. The observation and evidence, that 50%, is really based upon that preponderance of evidence at the domain level. So the accumulation of the evidence that you have. And then you also have temporary professional employees and professional employees. So you have tenured versus non-tenured teachers. You have to, you know, the difference between them. Your temporary professional employees receive 2 evaluations per year. So they would receive 2 82-1 ratings. And your professional employees just receive 1 summative rating at the end of the year. Now, your plan for how you collect the evidence to arrive at these ratings is really a district decision. So how many formal evaluations you have, how many walkthroughs you have, that really is you know, a district level decision. PDE does not say you have to have an X amount of these ratings. It's really up to you. If you implement a differentiated supervision model, that is an LEA decision. And what form of data collection system that you use. For example, if you're using PAETEP, Teachscape, or if you were using the PEERS system, PDE has not designated one specific data system that you use. It's really your control. So I mentioned about your temporary professional employees, and that's that, you know, they receive a mid-year and an end-of-year evaluation. So you would be completing 2, like I said, the 82-1s for your temporary professional employees. That's really all this screen says. And let's see, this one is timelines for the data. So really just at this point, you know, of the school year, it's November. You know, you think about your temporary professional employees. When will you be issuing that mid-year summative rating? Who completes them? And what is going to be the date in which you will have that as your cutoff? So it's something to think about at this point, you know, as we're approaching, not quite approaching a mid-year, but, you know, time goes by quickly, and before you know it, it'll be January, and it will definitely be time to start issuing those mid-year summative ratings for your temporary professional employees. Okay, so I'm going to actually pop out of the PowerPoint here because I'm going to talk about that teacher-specific data piece of the pie. I'm going to switch to the right-hand side of the pie. Before we do, this is where we consider that N count, and you'll see where the N count is going to play a factor in making some of the decisions as to what data will apply to teachers. And I will, like I said, I'm going to go out of this, and I'm going to go to the PDE's website. So up on my screen, hopefully you can see PDE's website. This is just their main page. I'm going to go to this tab where it says Teachers and Administrators. And I'm going to go down to where it says Educator Effectiveness, okay? I use this site. This is a good go-to site for all the resources that you may need when you're completing your evaluations. You can see here, here are those three buckets again: classroom teaching professionals, principals, CTCs, non-teaching professionals. As you scroll down the page, it will provide you the rules and regulations. It will take you to the electronic rating tools for each of the groups. There's the 82-1, 82.2 for principal CTC directors, and the 82.3 for non-teaching professionals. So I'm going to just go into the classroom teaching professionals for now. This is where yes. Do you have a question? Maybe not. Okay. So here we are, the classroom teaching professionals. Here's the pie chart that we just looked at. We talked, like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in this half. I think we've been rolling with that. The school, the SPP score, really, as long as it's not a brand new first-year teacher, because if you have a brand new first-year teacher and you think about their summative rating, once you arrive in January, you can't apply an SPP score to a teacher that's never been part of your building before. So when you receive, for your first-year teacher specifically, the summative rating, you will not have to plug in any data there for the SPP. You would just simply add in the evidence that you have, the same score that you have for their observation evidence would then take over for the building level score. Okay. So on this page, when we think about the teacher-specific data, there is a teacher-specific data decision-making guide. You can see it right here. I'm going to click on that. This is really the tool that you need to use in order to determine what data is going to apply to a specific teacher for that 15% teacher-specific data on a teacher's final evaluation, okay? So when you think of all of your teachers that you currently have that are considered the classroom teaching professional, this is your teaching professionals. They provide direct instruction to kids. They're assessing the whole 9 yards. So you have to look at the teacher-specific data is, there are four kind of categories that make up this 15%. We have student performance on assessment. We have the value-added assessment, which is your PVAS. Progress in meeting the goals of student IEPs, and then a locally developed rubric, which is pretty much the SLO process, and I'll go through each of these. So there are questions to address, as you'll see, to determine, and really, is the data available and is the data applicable to each teacher? And as you can see, for each of the categories, there's a certain percentage that needs to be applied to the data set. So for example, student performance on assessment, such as the PSSA Keystone exams, shall comprise no more than 5% of this overall 15%. Value added, which is the PVAS, shall comprise not less than 10, okay, so it has to be at least 10%, but no more than 15%. Progress in meeting the goals of IEP students, if it's available and if it's applicable, and I'll talk about that, shall comprise no more than 5%, and locally developed rubrics shall comprise no more than 15%. I will tell you that it's a district level decision to determine the specific percentages that will go in here. These are the guidelines that they tell you, but you determine whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%. You know, you have some of that flexibility when looking at these percentages. You have to stay within the suggested ranges here, but you can select those. You just need to be consistent with all teachers within all buildings. If you have multiple buildings, you want to make sure that you're all being consistent in the percentages that you choose. So let's look at the questions to address with teachers. So the first question, student performance on assessment. So the question is student performance assessment data available for this teacher in the tested grades and subject areas? Okay, so once again, keeping in mind the assessments that we're using are the PSSA, Keystone, and the PASA. So if you would say yes, there is student performance assessment data available for this teacher in a tested grade or subject, then you would go to answer 2, question 2. Okay. If the answer is no, then there's no data available for that teacher. Okay, so there would be nothing here for that teacher. If you think about your kindergarten, your first grade, your second grade teachers, okay, they would not have this data, okay, because they are not responsible for teaching a tested grade. They don't take the PSSAs in kindergarten, first or second grade, okay? Number 2, is this teacher responsible for the direct instruction? Here's where the N count comes in, of 11 or more students in a tested grade or subject. Okay? If the answer is yes, okay, then there is a table, Table H in the regulations, and also this table is listed on the 82-1, okay? And I can show you where that's at. So if the teacher is responsible for the direct instruction of 11 or more students, okay, then this data is available and applicable. Okay? Now, I will say you have a fourth grade, I'm going to use fourth grade as an example, because fourth grade teachers could potentially be responsible for teaching the math PSSA content, the ELA content, and the science, depending on how a teacher's caseload. Some teachers or districts departmentalize. Some teachers might still be delivering all of those content areas. So if you would have a teacher, say for example, fourth grade, who has all of that data, okay, and you think, okay, how am I going to attribute all of this data in their evaluation? This is where you have some flexibility. It's back to that local decision. If you have a teacher that has math, ELA, and or science, 1 or 2 or 3, it's up to the district to either take an average of all of those student scores, okay? So for example, you know, this is where it gets tedious. You know, you have to really break down the data. So if you look at a teacher's caseload, what was the percentage of proficient or advanced students on their caseload in science or in ELA or in math? And you have, like I said, you have the decision whether you want to use their math PSSA data, their ELA PSSA data, their science PSSA data, or a combination or an average of all 3. If you want to just say, okay, we are going to use, for a teacher that has multiple grades, we're just going to use, multiple subjects, we're going to use their math PSSA data to factor into their evaluation, to factor into their teacher-specific data. Okay, so that's, you have that choice. You have to use some, if there's available data, you have to use what you have, but you do have some flexibility there. That's something that not everybody realizes. So I always try to bring that up, okay? So what happens, this table, Table H in the regulations will say, for example, if between 95 and 100% of a teacher's students were proficient or advanced on the PSSA, then they would receive a score of a 3. Okay, and that 3, it's based upon that 0 to 3 scale. That 3 is the number that you would plug in to this section of the 82-1. Okay, you determine, once again, if it's going to be based upon is it going to be 1% of their evaluation, 2%, 3%, or a full 5% that's going to be attributed to that. But that's where you would enter that 3 score. And in this table, the regulations, what happens is as the amount of students that are proficient or distinguished decreases, then a teacher's score is going to decrease. They can go from a 3 to the 2.5 to a 2, so their points are going to decrease as the amount of students that are proficient or advanced decreases. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I'll see if, I'm not sure if there's anything that has come into the chat here. When I share my screen, I can't really see the questions coming in, so. But feel free to speak up if you do have any questions. All right, so I'm just going to move on. So that was the PSSA Keystone data piece. So is the data available, applicable? You have to go through that question for each teacher. Okay. Then we have, if we focus on the PVAS data now, the question is there value added teacher reports that contain a 3-year consecutive rolling average? This is important. This 3-year rolling average is important to this piece right here. So if the question is yes, so most likely, you know, if a teacher has if they're a teacher in a tested grade or subject, if they have this data, most likely they're going to have the value added data, except for your 3rd grade teachers. Your 3rd grade teachers will have PSSA data, but they're not going to have PVAS data because that's the baseline for 3rd grade. 3rd grade is when PVAS data starts. Okay, so a 3rd grade teacher would not have this right here, but your 4th grade, 5th grade, and beyond would have this data as long as they're at their 3-year consecutive rolling average point. Okay, if this data is available and applicable, then you're going to refer to Table I in the regulations. This table is just like the Table H, where it's going to give you a point value that you would use to enter into the table within the 82-1. Okay. Now, PVAS shall comprise not less than 10%. So it has to be at least 10% up here. Okay, there has to be at least 10. But you can then determine whether it's going to be 10%, 11%, 12, okay? You determine that. The next piece here, if we look, is progress in meeting the goals of student IEPs, which shall comprise no more than 5%. This can be a little bit tricky as well. So you first ask the question, is IEP progress data available for this teacher? It's either a yes or no. It's either yes, you think it's available, or no, it's definitely not available. So if you need to kind of define this a little bit better, is this teacher responsible for planning, teaching, and assessing 11 or more students in the attainment of their IEP goals in a specific content area or skill? Okay. So really this causes districts to kind of step back, right, and think about the IEPs that are just, especially within inclusion. So if you have regular ed teachers who have students with IEPs in their classroom, who is responsible for the attainment of those goals within the IEP? If it's a math goal, is it the regular ed teacher who's delivering that content? Is it the special education teacher? Is it a co-taught classroom? You really have to step back and look at the IEPs within each teacher's caseload. So if you would say, yes, there would be a teacher who is responsible for planning, teaching, and assessing 11 or more students in the attainment of their IEP goals, then you have to use the SLO process to address this. And I'm actually I'm gonna go back to PDE's website real quick here. And I'm going to show you the guidance document to determine this. So do you see where it says guidance document, student learning objectives process for IEP progress? So this guidance document helps to somewhat spell this out. So it says, what is meant by progress in meeting goals of IEP students, and how will this be measured as a component of the teacher-specific data? So if you look at this, it's a measure of growth and student performance that's related to a special education student meeting their IEP goals. So any measure that's based upon progress and that's made in meeting these goals of students' IEPs may be developed by the local LEA if applicable to a particular classroom teacher, and it's going to be validated through this process. And I'll show you the form here. So it says teachers may use aggregated caseload data of the percentage of students meeting IEP goals through documented progress monitoring. So the supervising administrator should work really in collaboration with the teacher to set performance measures and indicators that are going to show whether or not there's progress being made in the attainment of these IEP goals. All right, so considerations, you really have to once again define the caseload, a targeted subject and or grade level, and once again there needs to be 11 or more students in this targeted subject level or grade level. So if you think about it in that way, especially any smaller districts, chances are you're not going to meet this end count, but there could be situations in which you might. Here, this is the guidance document. This is kind of the template that they recommend that you use to kind of determine this. So here's your teacher. This is just the teacher's information. Kind of looks very similar to an SLO template, but it's not identical by no means. So here's a sample goal, SLO goal, that would be related to progress in meeting the goals of an IEP as required under the IDEA. So here's a goal statement. This is just a sample goal statement. So the targeted population of students, whatever is determined up here, will make meaningful progress towards meeting their, for example, whatever content area or skill that you're focusing on, as defined by their IEP and measured by ongoing progress monitoring. So this is where local decision comes into play. So you plug in percentages here. So if 0 to say 50% of the students make progress towards meeting their IEP goals, then that teacher would technically be considered failing and would receive a 0. It's at 0 to 3 scale again, would be considered failing, would be given a 0 for that category of the teacher-specific data. And then you determine these percentages. So if that's 0 to 50, and then maybe this is 50 to 70% of students will make progress, and that's a needs improvement. If between 80 and 90% of students made progress towards meeting their IEP goals, that teacher will be considered proficient. And then if between 90% and 100% of the students made progress, that teacher will be considered distinguished. It's a 0 for failing, a 1, a 2, and a 3. Those are the numbers that you would plug in. Okay. So this, I really, like I said, this can cause folks to kind of have questions in terms of what to do here. But you really need to follow that end count rule and really take a look at a teacher's caseload and to see if, who's really responsible for the IEPs and the goals within, and the students making progress towards meeting those goals. Okay. Any questions on that? Feel free to unmute and I'll pause here. Okay. All right, if no questions, I'll continue, but feel free if that ever comes up and you're not sure what that would look like for a specific teacher, let me know and we'll try to work through it together. I really, to be honest with you, have not had many situations in which districts said, hey, does this really apply to a particular teacher? So it's kind of an area that's sort of there. And so if anything pops up, certainly, let me know. I'm going to go back to that decision-making guide. So we covered the student performance and assessment, the PVAS, IEP progress. And then the last piece, which if we scroll up here, the last piece is the locally developed rubric shall comprise no more than 15%. So what does that mean? All right, so for a classroom teacher that has no attributable assessment data, so they're not responsible for PSSA, Keystone, they do not have any PVAS data, or maybe they don't have any IEP progress related type of data, then what's left is this elective, this LDR, which a district would have the option of creating like a district-wide or a school-wide SLO. This is where you have an option. So you can, maybe, you wanted to implement writing across all grade levels in your school. So maybe you as a district would create an SLO that would fulfill this section of the teacher-specific data. Or if a district chooses not to implement a locally developed rubric, then what happens is a teacher's SLO, which is the 20%, if you think of the pie chart, the elective data, what would happen is a teacher's SLO score would then could be counted twice, okay? You would also plug it in here, okay? So really a teacher that does not have any PSSA, Keystone, PVAS, no data attributed to them, their SLO could potentially be considered a total of 35% of their overall evaluation, because they would get 20% of their elective data, plus you're also plugging that score into the teacher-specific piece that would comprise that 15% of a locally developed rubric score. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's as clear as mud. That's kind of a good way of putting it. So this document really does help break down each of the components of the teacher-specific data chart. But it really is something you have to consider for every single teacher within your building to determine what data will be applied towards their final evaluation. Okay? So I'm just going to go back to the PDE's website. So we talked about for your classroom teaching professionals. So these are your teaching professionals that will be issued EQ-1s. We talked about building level data, which is just your SPP score. We talked about the teacher-specific data, what comprises this 15%. Okay, you have to look at each piece there. And then their elective data, which is their SLO, which is 20%. For the SLO templates are here on PDE's website. One of the last year when we were implementing SLOs, there was a determination made by the state that at least one of the measures within a teacher's SLO has to be focused on student growth and not mastery. Okay, so there has to be at least one measure that's a growth-related measure in which students will show growth over a period of time. So that's just, one little piece of information that's still out there. Nothing has changed with that. So I'm going to open up the 82-1 just quickly so that you can see this. Here is if you go to down here you have the instruction tabs, or the different tabs that take you to each section. So you plug in the teacher's information here, and everything that you plug in will then pre-populate to the other sections of the form. Here's your observation evidence, your 50%, the left-hand side of the pie. So a teacher would receive a 0, 1, 2, or 3 in each of these sections based upon all the evidence that you've gathered in the domains. Okay. And you can see here the values 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Here's your building level score. So this is your SPP. So if you're looking at your SPP scores, whatever your SPP score is, would then be entered into, and it's automatically converted for you. So you'd enter the SPP score, and that will be converted to a 0 to 3 scale. If a teacher is in multiple buildings, then you would have to, there's a section there that you would have to kind of figure out the percentage of responsibility if they're between 2 buildings. And here it is right there. There's the multiple buildings. Here's your teacher-specific section that we just covered. So student performance on assessment, between 0 and 5%. The district will determine what that assigned percentage will be. This is where you will plug in the ratings. And if you look down here, here are those tables that I was talking about. There's table H, and this is for the conversion of the percentage scale for the assessment rating. So students proficient or advanced, you can see the percentages here. If it's between 95 and 100% were proficient or advanced, you can see the ratings that they receive, and as the percentages decrease, so does the rate. Okay. Here's the conversion for the PVAS scores here. All right, so that all that information is there for you. And once again, they give you some, there's some more information that kind of describes each component a little bit more.
Hi, come on in. You're fine.
Here's your elective data. So whatever a teacher would receive on his or her SLO, which is a 0, 1, 2, or 3, will be entered there. And then finally, once you would plug in all of that information, it does pre-populate into this final summary sheet, and it will arrive at a performance rating for the teacher. Okay, so just something to consider here. If a teacher receives a distinguished or a proficient rating, then that automatically yields to a satisfactory overall. If a teacher would be determined a needs improvement, for the first time a teacher would receive a needs improvement, that would yield a satisfactory. However, if a teacher would receive a second, and it says that here within the fine print, if a teacher receives a needs improvement a second time by the same employer within 10 years of that first rating of a needs improvement, then that would be considered an unsat. And then you would follow whatever processes you have in place for an unsatisfactory rating. Okay, so the first needs improvement would yield a satisfactory. A second needs improvement within a 10-year period of time within the first rating of an unsat, or needs improvement, then that would yield an unsatisfactory rating. And obviously a failing would result in an unsatisfactory rating. Okay. Okay, so any questions on the 82-1? Okay. So that really concludes just the classroom teaching professionals, that first bucket.
He said if you call him before 10.
So I'm going to just go to the main page of educator effectiveness. So if we go into I'm going to go into the non-teaching professionals.
Did you say he's in the office until 10? Yeah. Okay.
So non-teaching professionals, this one is a little bit more simple than the classroom teaching professionals. Basically, your non-teaching professionals are those in which are not providing direct instruction to kids, or are your specialists, supervisors. All of those folks fall into a non-teaching professional. 80% of their observation will be, or of their evaluation will be based upon observation and evidence, and 20% would be derived from the full performance profile, the SPP. Okay. Listed here are the approved rubrics that you would use for any of these specialists that you have within your school system. And there's also some guiding questions to support some dialogue between whomever's supervising this professional and the professional themselves. Here you have your supervisors, the crosswalk between the framework for leadership that you would use to work with these folks. Here's the electronic rating form for the 82-3. It's the same kind of process. You simply just plug in the numbers. Okay. Any questions on non-teaching professionals? No? Okay, you guys are making this easy. So the next category that I'm going to talk about here are principals and CTC directors. Okay. So as this loads, you can see that here would be the different components that make up a principal's evaluation or the CTC director's evaluation. What you can see, it's very similar to a teacher's evaluation. You can see it's the same kind of, the pie chart looks similar, but some of the data is a little bit different. The 50% observation in practice will come from the framework for leadership. There are 4 domains that comprise the framework for leadership, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. 15% of a principal's evaluation will be taken directly from the SPP once again. 15% would be taken from, it's called the correlation data, and I'll go into that again, just like I did with the teacher specific, because this one gets a little bit, it's a little detailed. And then 20% elective data would be principal SLO. Okay, just as teachers have SLOs, a principal has an SLO as well. Looks a little bit different than a teacher's, but it's the same kind of process. So the resources that you have here, you have the rules and regulations once again. Here's the electronic rating for the 82-2. Here's a differentiated supervision process if you're familiar, if you want to use that as a resource at all. So here's the framework for leadership. It's a PDF. You can certainly open that up, and it takes you through the framework for leadership, and it does have 4 different domains. And within each domain, there is a failing, a needs improvement, proficient, and distinguished category for the different components, just as you see for the framework for teaching, the Danielson framework. So this framework for leadership really is going to be the guide for principals as they reflect on their practice, and as supervising administrators gather evidence for principals, they would be gathering evidence and using that evidence to support the different components within the different domains. Okay. Here are some resources that can be used. For example, what are some examples of evidence that could be gathered and that would match the different domains and the components within the domains? So this document here just provides some sample evidence that would be, could fall within this component. There is a section here that maybe you as a district would locally agree upon some additional evidence that you may use to support each component. But this is really just a document that you can refer to that says, what kind of evidence would really fall into these different domains and components. So that's really just a resource for you. Here are actually two different resources, some possible guiding questions between principals and teachers. So as a principal works with teachers through the framework for the Danielson framework, here are just some guiding questions that principals can use as they're conferencing with teachers based upon the different components within the domains. So some questions that you may ask to generate additional conversation when you're meeting with teachers. So this is what administrators would use, principals would be using with teachers. And then there's also the same type of document listed that maybe superintendents would be using with principals to elicit the conversation when you're having those kind of discussions, for evaluation purposes. So these are just, like I said, they're just handy. They're there to help guide the process. All right, so I'm gonna talk about that correlation piece, which is this 15% correlation data. Okay, so what does this mean? So this 15%, the correlation data, is really based upon the quality of the conversation that a principal would have with his or her supervising administrator, based upon the evidence that has been gathered. So that evidence would be the evidence that you gather on your teachers' evaluations, like how a principal is rating their teachers, compared to what the data looks like. So when you get your SPP score, when you get your PVAS data, how are your ratings to teachers comparing to the data that's coming in? Okay, so it's really based upon the conversation that you can have with your supervising administrator. So I'm going to pull up some of these charts here. All right. So as you kind of start to sift through the data that you collect, what you see here, this chart provides possible levels of connectedness between an average teacher's observation and practice rating and, for example, the school performance profile. So when you start to look at the data, okay, and you can do so, I'll pull up this little, say you start to organize all of your data into a chart, okay? Here's an example of a chart that could be used. Let me just pull this over, okay. So as a principal, okay, say you list all of your teachers by name. Okay, you can say, okay, what department do they teach if it's secondary? What grade level do they teach if it's elementary? How many years of experience does a teacher have? What would be a teacher's rating in domain 1? What was the teacher's rating in domain 2, domain 3, domain 4? What would be each teacher's overall observation and practice rating form? Okay, so the 50% observation evidence based upon the Danielson framework, what did these teachers, what was their rating? And then you can arrive at an average. What would be your average overall teacher rating that you are seeing within your building? For each teacher, if this data is applicable, you could put in their, well, it's not, this chart's a little bit old, but you would combine, obviously, reading and writing. What would be a teacher specific? What would be their PVAS ELA, if it's applicable? Their PVAS math score, okay? What would be their SLO score? So you're going to, at some point, gather all of this data, because then this data helps drive the conversation when you start looking at overall building level data. Okay, so you can use a chart of some sort like this to help you gather that evidence. So as you gather that evidence, okay, and you arrive at an average teacher score within your building, and you think about the SPP score. So if your average teacher observation practice rating was between a 2.5 and a 3, and your SPP score was between a 90 and a 107, then that's saying that there's a lot of evidence that indicates that the way in which a principal is rating a teacher, there's a strong connectedness to the SPP score. So it's kind of in line. You're seeing that, your average teacher ratings are proficient to distinguished, and it's reflecting that way in your SPP. Now, if you start to look at the evidence as it decreases, so for example, if you're rating your teachers high, proficient, distinguished, however, when your SPP score comes in and your SPP is between a 60 and a 70, so now you start to ask questions, okay, there's evidence that may indicate that there's a limited level of connectedness here, like what's going on, okay? And this really just drives the conversation. this doesn't mean that your evaluation is going to, that you're going to get a lower evaluation because this is the way the data looks. That's not the case. It's based upon the conversation that you have with your administrator that you can simply, or not simply, that you can explain why you're seeing the data that you're seeing. You have evidence to support, well, you know, there's other means of evidence that you have that may indicate why this connectedness may be lower. So you really use this chart to drive conversation. So same thing with PVAS. So as you get your teacher PVAS scores in, okay, what's the average? And once again, you ask those same kind of questions. What's your average teacher observation score? And what's the average teacher PVAS score? And is there connectedness, or are you seeing, you know, the data is kind of all over the place? And it just brings about that conversation again. So you use this chart to compare your average teacher rating to your SPP, to your PVAS correlation, as well as to your elective data, the SLOs. Okay. So that's what the levels of connectedness means. I'll pull out of that. So then if we look at this document, so a supervising administrator, a superintendent, or whomever is evaluating the principal or assistant principal is going to use this rubric, per se, to arrive at an administrator's correlation score that would go in that 15% correlation data piece. So remember that this correlation score is really going to be based upon the quality of a conversation that is had between the administrators. And so this rating, it's a principal's degree of understanding of the evidence that's presented regarding that relationship between teacher level measures, such as basically how the right-hand side of the pie correlates to the left-hand side of the pie. So it's a degree of understanding. It's the quality of the explanation that's provided by the principal, okay, based upon what they're seeing in their data. And most importantly, the plans for how the data is going to be used to support school and LEA goals. Okay, so that 15% rating, once again, is derived from a principal's degree of understanding of the evidence presented, the quality of an explanation that's provided, and the plans for how the data is going to be used to make decisions. And then so that supervising administrator, that superintendent, would then use this rubric to arrive at a score for that correlation rating. So, you know, basically the principal has no understanding of the correlation between the, you know, the teacher's average scores and how that's comparing to SPP. Or, you know, you have limited understanding, you have a solid understanding, or you have a comprehensive understanding. So, you know, that correlation piece really is just, it's conversations that are had surrounding the data that comes into your school and how you can analyze that data. Okay, and then the principal or administrator is going to rate you based upon these three concepts here. Okay. And you would get a 0, 1, 2, or 3 that would be plugged into that correlation piece. Okay. And if superintendents, there is this document is the guidance for completing that correlation piece. I kind of just explained. I can enable that here. Is that working? There we go. And this is just the guidance for completing that correlation section. Here's the degree of understanding, quality of explanation, and the plans for moving forward. Here are basically some questions and some conversations or descriptions that can be used to arrive at those scores. Okay. And here's a notes for discussion or any kind of documentation that would want to be noted there. Do you have to use this form? No, you do not have to use this form. This is just, you know, it's a tool that can be used if you so choose. Okay. So here is overall. Well, hold on. Let me go. Let me go here real quick. And then the final piece, before I go to that process form, the final piece of a principal's evaluation is really based upon the principal SLO. Okay. And here in this section here, there's guidance for completing the elective section for a principal. Here's the SLO template for a principal. And here are the template with guiding questions. So if I just open that up real quick. And this is what the template looks like for principals. And once again, you also want to use that growth measure. You want to be able to show growth within your SLO and not just focus on that mastery piece. And a lot of times, you know, really when you're having those conversations with administrators in that correlation data piece, a lot of what you find there will then drive what you want your principal SLO to be. Okay, so your principal SLO, it really focuses on, you know, building level kind of goals, you know, based upon maybe, you know, Keystone data that you're seeing, PSSA data that you're seeing, PVAS data that you're seeing. You know, you kind of arrive at a goal that you want based upon the data that you currently see. You know, do you want to increase, you know, third grade PSSA scores in math by 10% or that? I do have sample, I know I have sent out sample SLOs before. I do have a variety of sample principal SLOs. If you're interested in any of them, if you've never received them before via email, I have sent them out, but if you didn't receive them, feel free to email me and I will send you a variety of sample principal SLOs. They're not that they have been vetted, but they are just samples that you can use to kind of help guide you as you create your own. Okay. So this is just, if you think of principal effectiveness overall, and how you go through the process from kind of start to finish, assuming that you and your superintendent agree or that you are a proficient principal overall, this is kind of the steps that you will kind of go through. Using that framework for leadership, you can conduct a self-reflection on that framework for leadership, you know, kind of go through the components. You can certainly highlight areas of strength. You can highlight areas that you feel you need to grow in. And then you would identify 2 or 3 areas, okay, or components within the domains, making sure that one of them is from that leadership for learning. So you're identifying 2 or 3 of those areas that really would be your focus for your overall rating. It's kind of like your goals that you set for yourself. You would review all of the available data. So all of the data that you have, it doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, summative data. You can use other data sets that you collect in the school, you know, whether it's Dibbles data, you know, any perception data, any data that you have. It's back to the conversation that you have with your principal or your superintendent, you know, your degree of understanding, you know, your plans that you have moving forward based upon the data that you see. So you have a conversation with your superintendent outlining what your school's data picture looks like and the plan of action that you intend to take to strengthen your areas of weakness within the framework, and as a result of your data review reflection, which is your correlation data. Establish 2 or 3 goals that align with your improvement plans that you've outlined, and make sure that one of your goals is based in student growth, like I said, and use that goal to develop your SLO. Use your SLO you'll use your SLO to monitor the implementation of the plan that you designed and the goals that you have established. So overall, I mean, this process is flexible as you work through, you know, the components of principal effectiveness. There isn't really, other than you have to complete an 82-2, you know, that has to be completed, you know, and you use that framework for leadership as your guide. You know, that's really how the conversations, it's just ongoing conversations that you have with your administrators. Okay. All right, so once again, I'll pause. Do we have any questions on principal effectiveness? No? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I didn't see any other questions in the chat. Oh, here's one. Grade 3 teachers. Yes, there's a question. Grade 3 teachers should receive a student performance on PSSA. Yes, grade 3 teachers definitely receive. They have, when you think of the student or the teacher-specific data, that 15%, they would have at least up to 5% of their rating will be derived on that performance on the PSSA. They will not have PVAS data available or applicable, but they will have performance on PSSA. So that is correct, yes. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, that pretty much is an overview of Act 82 in relation to all three categories: your classroom professionals, your non-teaching professionals, and your principal CTC directors. If there's anything that I showed you that you would like to have electronically, feel free to let me know. You can email me, jvankus@iu08.org. I will be happy to share anything that I have or any questions that you may have specifically. Okay. Well, thanks for joining, and I will, because I do have this recorded, and I will send out the recording to any of you that may want to share with other colleagues back at your district. So, all right, thanks, and I'll send it out as soon as I can figure out how to do how to actually post a recording. So I'll figure it out. So, all right, thanks everyone. I'm going to end the meeting.